All right, so welcome to the deep dive, where we take a bunch of sources that you give us and try to get you up to speed really quickly.
That's right. We dig in deep.
Exactly. And today we're diving into the world of Franz Kafka,
Oh, Kafka. Yes.
thanks to a listener who sent in a fantastic collection of his
Oh,
works.
very cool.
So we've got excerpts from the Metamorphosis and other stories from his early, little short sketches, meditation,
Okay.
the stories, the Judgement, and of course the Metamorphosis.
Right.
We've got a little bit from In the Penal Colony and then that intensely personal letter to his father.
Wow, what a range.
Yeah, and it's all contextualized very helpfully by the Oxford World's Classics edition.
Nice.
So our goal today is to uncover the recurring themes that we see throughout all these works. Those anxieties about who we are as people,
Okay.
societal pressures, the constant struggle between wanting to connect with people and then feeling totally isolated.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's going to be a fascinating deep dive, I think, to see how these themes kind of evolve from, those little short pieces
Yeah.
to the longer stories and then that really personal letter.
That raw outpouring.
Yeah.
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 I think it's really interesting to see how even in those early meditation sketches,
Mm.
you can see these like little kernels of what become his bigger preoccupations later on,
Right.
especially when you compare to that letter to his father, which is so much more raw and, emotionally direct.
Totally.
So the meditation pieces, it feels like he's playing with different lenses,
Yeah.
trying to see how to look at humanity in new ways.
Yeah.
And he hasn't quite gotten to that rawness that he gets to later on.
Right. And they were published very early on too. So
Yeah, that's right.
he was kind of figuring it out, I
Yeah.
think. Let's look at the swing.
Okay.
Because you get this really wonderful fleeting image of kids just being kids.
Uh-huh.
They're, running around the evening. He says, butting through the evening with their heads, which I love that phrase.
It's so Kafka-esque.
And it's all this energy, but it's aimless.
Yeah.
And then you have the male coach and the train, and those are moving with a purpose.
Yeah.
And then there's that Indian war whoop, which is just so out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But it's like a spark of escape almost,
Yeah, maybe.
And then the narrator just takes off running into the woods
Wow.
towards this city of fools.
That sounds interesting.
Doesn't it? I mean, you mentioned aha moments. Did this one make you think about anything?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's that classic thing of like, kids just being free and energetic and then adults having all these structures.
Totally.
And I love that he calls it a city of fools because you don't know, is that actually like a good thing or is that just another structure, but it's a structure of fools.
Right. Is it a haven or is it a trap?
Exactly. It's that ambiguity that Kafka's so good at.
Yes.
Like leaves you wondering.
Definitely. And speaking of wondering, something I really relate to in the meditation sketches is how much his self-confidence just wavers. Like in The Passenger, he's just standing on the tram platform
Uh-huh.
and he's feeling uncertain about everything.
I get that.
Don't you? Just like, where do I even fit in with all these people?
Totally. Even with your own family.
Exactly. And then in Unmasking a Confidence Man, the narrator feels totally vulnerable at first.
Yeah.
Like he's going to be taken advantage of, but then he figures out the con and suddenly he's confident.
He sees through it.
Yeah. And then the sudden stroll, it's just like out of nowhere, this burst of confidence.
Well, it's
and
never-
then the way home, there's this huge thunderstorm and then everything feels different.
Wow.
So I feel like Kafka's really good at capturing those little anxieties,
Yeah.
little struggles that we all have every day.
Yeah. And it's like these little shifts inside us,
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not always like some big event makes you feel different sometimes. It's just like the weather changes inside you.
Yeah, exactly.
And it makes you wonder, like, how much of who we are depends on what's happening around us and how much is just us.
Right. Are we really in control or are we just reacting to everything?
Exactly.
And it's interesting because in these sketches, we also get these glimpses of, kind of virile masculine figures.
Right.
The guy with the walking stick or like the heroes in the rebuff.
Right.
The Oxford notes point out that it's this contrast with the kind of timid, lonely I that's in so many of the sketches.
Yeah.
Like in Children on the Highway or Gazing Out Idly.
Right.
And then you have the wish to become a Red Indian, which is just so fascinating.
Sure.
To have the strength of a grown-up, but the freedom of a child.
Uh-uh.
Like, it's the ultimate escape from all the rules. It really makes you think about identity in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I think that's a basic human desire,
Is it?
to want to be strong and free.
Like to have it all.
Yeah. We have all these responsibilities as adults. but we remember being kids and how free we felt.
Right.
And that Red Indian, it adds that extra layer of like exoticness.
Yeah.
Like something totally wild and different.
Untamed. And then there's the image of clothes, which pops up a few times, like in dresses, the rebuff, and the passenger. And it seems like clothes represent how we present ourselves to the world.
Right.
The social code, you know?
Yeah.
And the notes mention this idea of Baroque allegory.
Oh, interesting.
Like the clothes are beautiful and fancy, but they get old and worn out.
Yeah, like everything fades.
Exactly. So it's like we put on this show for everyone, but underneath it, all things are always changing.
Right. It's like clothes are this secret language that we use to say who we are.
Or who we want people to think we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But the message can get mixed up.
Totally.
Not everyone reads it the same way.
Right. And then there's unhappiness, which is such a strange and intimate look at isolation.
Okay.
He's pacing back and forth, and he sees his reflection, and it's almost like another person.
Wow.
And then there's this ghostly shadow self, but the text actually says it's a projection of himself.
Okay.
So it's like he's haunted by himself in a way. And then he has this weird conversation with his neighbor.
About what?
About taking the ghost away.
Oh, wow.
It's like he wants to get rid of this part of himself, but he's not really sure if he does.
Yeah, like maybe he needs it.
Exactly.
And that's the thing about like being really honest about how you feel.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't even explain it to yourself.
Let alone to someone else.
Right. And the neighbor's just confused.
Exactly. It's so Kafka.
Totally.
So let's move on to the Judgement.
Okay.
Now, this is a more developed story.
Yeah.
It opens on this beautiful spring morning,
Uh-huh.
and Georg is writing a letter to his friend who's in St. Petersburg.
Okay.
But even though it's this peaceful scene, you can feel this anxiety.
Like something's not quite right.
Yeah, and that contrast really sets the tone, I think.
I agree.
And Georg is trying to decide if he should tell his friend about his engagement.
Oh, interesting.
He's worried about upsetting him.
Makes sense.
And maybe he's even a little jealous of his friend.
No, how come?
Because the friend is living this solitary life in St. Petersburg, which the notes say could be like a reference to Peter's city,
Okay.
potentially Rome. So it brings in these Christian themes.
Right.
And betrayal is a big part of the story.
Wow. So that idea is there from the very beginning.
Exactly. And then he goes to visit his father in his room.
What happens?
Well, the father's room is dark, and there's this immediate shift in power.
Oh.
The father starts questioning if Georg's friend even exists.
Right.
And Georg gets flustered and says, 1,000 friends wouldn't replace my father. But it feels like he's not really answering the question.
It does kind of come out of nowhere.
And then it comes out that Georg hasn't thought about what will happen to his father after the marriage.
Oh, wow.
Like he's totally focused on himself.
That's tough.
Right. And it shows how sometimes we say we care about people,
Yeah.
but our actions don't really show it.
It's like we're not really thinking about their needs.
Exactly.
We're too caught up in our own stuff.
And then the father just lets loose.
What do you mean?
He says that he's been writing to the friend in St. Petersburg.
Really?
And then he says, drown yourself.
He actually says that?
Yeah, it's so harsh and sudden.
Wow.
The notes suggest that the father represents these old value systems,
Like what?
Judaism, Christianity,
Oh, okay.
and that Georg betraying his friend is like Peter denying Jesus.
Interesting.
So it's this huge condemnation.
Yeah, Kafka's fathers are always these really powerful figures.
They are.
Like they represent all these rules and expectations.
Right.
And Georg is trying to break free, but he can't.
Exactly. And the father just crushes them.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Totally. All right, so now we got to talk about the Metamorphosis.
A big one.
Right. Arguably his most famous story.
Probably.
So it starts with Gregor Samsa waking up as a giant bug.
Yeah, that's a pretty good opening.
It gets your attention.
For sure.
But the thing is, his first thoughts are totally normal.
Like what?
He's worried about work. He doesn't want to miss his train.
Wow, so he's thinking about a job even though he's a bug?
Yeah, it's so weird and funny and unsettling all at the same time.
It really throws you off.
It does.
Because it makes you wonder, like, how would you react?
Yeah, would you freak out or would you be like, oh no, I gotta get to work?
It's like he's trying so hard to pretend that everything's normal,
Yeah.
even though it's so obviously not.
Right, and then he tries to get out of bed.
Which has got to be hard with all those legs.
And it's so gross and sad at the same time, you know?
Yeah.
And then the chief clerk shows up and he is just awful.
What does he do?
He just yells at Gregor and accuses him of being lazy.
Oh, wow.
He doesn't care at all that Gregor's a bug.
He just cares about the work.
Exactly. It's like Gregor's not even human anymore.
It's like all he's good for is being a worker.
Right. And that's when his family sees him for the first time.
What do they do?
Well, his mother faints. His father is like violent.
Violent how?
He hits him with a walking stick and throws a newspaper at him.
Oh my gosh.
And his sister Greet, she tries to take care of him at first,
Okay.
but then even she gets tired of it.
Wow. So his whole family turns on him.
Yeah, it's really sad and disturbing.
It's like they don't know how to handle it.
Right, and they're also scared.
Of course.
And they have to figure out how to live without Gregor's income.
Right, because he's the one supporting them.
Exactly, so it's this huge shift in their family dynamic.
It's like his transformation forces them to change too.
Yeah, it's like a reverse metamorphosis.
That's a good way to put it.
And Gregor is just so isolated.
Yeah.
He has all these memories of his old life, and he wants to connect with his family, but he can't.
And they don't really want to connect with him.
Right, they're grossed out by him.
Yeah.
And he gets angry because they're not taking good care of him.
I mean, I can understand that.
And then they decide to take all the furniture out of his room.
Really?
Yeah, and he tries to stop them from taking this picture.
What picture?
It's a picture of a woman in furs. And it feels like that picture represents his last bit of humanity.
Like his connection to beauty and maybe even love.
Yeah, and then these lodgers move in.
Oh, yeah.
And the family starts focusing all their attention on the lodgers.
So they're like replacing Gregor.
Yeah, in a way.
That's so sad.
And then Greet plays her violin for the lodgers.
Uh-huh.
And Gregor comes out of his room because he loves the music.
He wants to connect with them.
Exactly, but the lodgers are freaked out.
Of course.
And they demand an explanation.
Oh, wow.
It's like this last failed attempt at connection.
Yeah.
And then he goes back to his room and dies.
Just like that.
Yeah, it's very sudden.
Oh.
And then the charwoman finds him.
What does she do?
She's just very matter-of-fact about it.
Like it's no big deal.
And the family is initially shocked, but then they're just relieved.
Relieved that he's gone.
Yeah, and they start making plans for the future.
Like he was holding them back.
Exactly, and the story ends with them going for a walk in the countryside.
It's so unsettling.
It is, isn't it like his life meant nothing to them in the end?
Yeah, and they're just moving on.
Like he was just a burden. So let's talk a little bit about In the Penal Colony.
Okay.
Now, this is a really dark and disturbing story.
Yes, it's intense.
It's all about justice and punishment and the abuse of power.
Right.
So there's this machine called the harrow,
Okay.
and it carves the law onto the prisoner's body.
That's awful.
It's incredibly brutal, and the officer who runs it is totally devoted to it.
He believes in it.
Oh, yeah, he thinks it's the only way to achieve justice.
Wow.
And then there's this traveler who's visiting the colony, and he's very skeptical of the whole thing.
He doesn't think it's right.
No, he thinks it's barbaric.
Which it is.
Totally. And so you have this clash between the officer and the traveler.
Two very different viewpoints.
Exactly. And it makes you think about how different cultures view justice and punishment.
Right, like what one person thinks is fair, another person thinks is totally wrong.
Exactly. And then the officer decides to submit himself to the harrow.
What?
Yeah, he wants to prove how effective it is.
Oh my God.
But the machine malfunctions.
That happens?
It kills him instantly.
Oh, wow.
Instead of the slow, agonizing death it's supposed to deliver.
So it's like a twisted kind of justice.
Yeah, in a way.
Like the machine turned on it.
Exactly, and it shows how these systems of control can be so unpredictable and dangerous.
Right, even the people who believe in them can become victims.
Exactly. So finally, let's talk about Letter to His Father.
Okay.
This is such a powerful and personal piece of writing.
It really is.
You can feel Kafka's pain and frustration.
Yeah.
He talks about how he always felt inadequate compared to his father.
Like he could never measure up.
Exactly. And he gives all these specific examples.
Like what?
Like when they would get undressed together as kids.
That's kind of weird.
It is. And Kafka felt so small and weak next to his father.
Like he was nothing.
Yeah, he actually says he felt like a little skeleton.
Oh, wow.
And his father would always dismiss his interests and his friends.
Really?
Yeah, like there was this actor named Lowy who Kafka was friends with, and his father just thought he was a loser. Yeah, and it really damaged Kafka's self-confidence.
Not bad.
He felt this constant guilt.
Like he could never do anything right.
Exactly, and even when his father was nice to him, it just made him feel more guilty.
Oh, he didn't deserve it.
Right, and he talked about how he never felt like he could live up to his father's expectations.
Especially about the family business.
Right, he felt like he had no business sense.
Huh?
And he saw his career as a way to escape his father.
Like he was running away.
Exactly, and he was always afraid to really express himself.
He thought his father would disapprove.
Yeah, and then he talks about why he never got married.
Interesting.
He says it's because he felt unworthy.
Wow.
And because he saw how unhappy his father was in his own marriage.
So he didn't think he could be a good husband.
Right. It's really sad.
It is.
So, looking back at all these works,
Yeah.
we see these themes of anxiety and isolation and guilt
Definitely.
and the struggle to figure out who you are.
Especially when you have these powerful forces trying to control you.
Right, whether it's your family or society or even just your own thoughts.
Exactly.
And Kafka is so good at using these surreal situations
Yeah.
to show us these very real human experiences.
Like the guy turning into a bug.
Right, or the machine that carves the law onto your body.
It's so bizarre, but it makes you think.
It does.
And that's why people still read Kafka today.
Totally. So for you, our listener, I want to leave you with this.
Okay.
Think about how these anxieties that Kafka wrote about,
Uh-huh.
how they might connect to your own life.
That's a good question.
What pressures do you feel?
Yeah.
What makes you feel isolated or guilty?
Right.
And what are the metamorphoses that we all go through?
Interesting.
You know, the big and small changes that happen to us because of those pressures.
Yeah.
I think Kafka shows us that we're not alone in those struggles.
That's brilliant.
And that even though the world keeps changing,
Yeah.
these basic human experiences are still the same.
They are.